Well, end of season ones are always difficult, especially when you don't get to the postseason. But we are here to recap the year with head coach Lance Rhodes as the Salukis wrapped up the Missouri Valley Conference Baseball Championship this past weekend. Coach Rhodes, appreciate the time as always. Like I said, it's hard to always put the ending on a year, especially when it doesn't end the way you wanted it to, which you and the guys have talked about that all year, that you didn't reach the expectation. I said it on the broadcast, though, as we closed out on Saturday. Even with maybe there is disappointment that you ultimately didn't reach the goals that you all wanted to, the way you wanted your team to play, I felt like is how they played their best here down the stretch, especially in Evansville.
No, I mean, I think our guys, they laid everything on the line there at the conference tournament, and, we couldn't ask for a better effort for sure. The tough thing is with the weather, the delays, I really felt like we were in a good position. And then, that day where we were basically in a hotel until about 8 p.m. that night, no excuses at all. It is what it is. But we just came out pretty flat that day after, having to sit and not play till 10 p.m. And, it's just kind of one of those things where it's unfortunate, but just happy that we never quit in the conference tournament. I mean, we had to come back, and we had to play Indiana State again, and I thought we competed really well and played competitively against them. And it's just kind of one of those things too, where it's like all season long it was just like an injury here, an injury there, and to lose Hansel right before the conference tournament. And, an arm that would have for sure probably eaten 5, 6, 7 innings up in the conference tournament that we then had to spread probably back through people who had already been used. It just made it really difficult. And but it was, it was a fun, start to the tournament and kind of a disappointing end to it. But yeah, I mean, it's always tough when the season's over because it just goes so fast. You just wish you had more time, and that's the only thing you never have enough of is time.
I know I was getting asked a lot of questions through the broadcast of where's Mike Hansel, where's Mike Hansel. It was one of those things that you knew heading into the tournament was going to ask you about it afterwards. Tell us when you guys knew that you found out that you weren't going to be able to have Mike, and as you said, that's a big deal because it really maybe not have affected you right at the start or even for the first Indiana State game. As you went deeper into the tournament, especially that game against Illinois State, I felt that was the night where you're like, gosh, this would have been a really great spot to obviously use Mike.
Yeah, he had the finger injury after the weekend at Missouri State, and so we knew prior going into the tournament that it was going to be very difficult for him to be able to throw, and he continued to throw up until the tournament was over. It was just extremely painful for him to be able to throw a ball. It also limited on what he could actually throw. So we just, we could have probably put him in a situation where, the score was really out of hand. But we really, other than getting beat that one night, we really never had an opportunity to get him in and use him. And that was the thing, too. Like, a lot of coaches at the hotel and stuff were like, man, you guys are in good shape. You still have Hansel left and all that stuff. And I never said anything when I was just thinking, man, I wish. And, so, yeah, that was difficult losing, a starting pitcher right before the tournament.
Well, the other side, when you go back to the Indiana State game, I know we didn't get to catch up with you right after the second game, which ended the tournament for you. But it was one of those areas where you said you knew that you were going to have to give your best shot, and your team did. But one thing throughout the year that I felt showed in that game, too, was just some internal mistakes that really capitalized. Obviously, the inning where you had the 3 errors that really helped aided Indiana State to have a big inning. That's a team that you don't need the help to get a big inning, which they saw later in the game. How does that part of how maybe that inning specifically describes the whole season, Coach Rhodes, but where that's an area where you want next year that not to happen consistently, where at times it felt like those were times that would happen this year where you guys just shot yourselves in the foot?
Yeah, I think the thing that is probably most disappointing about it, and you're always going to make a mistake here and there, but it seemed like the times where we really got in trouble in a game this season is we had those mistakes 2-3 times in one inning. And, if you look back at that game, I mean, we legitimately could have been, probably in the fourth or fifth inning with the 3-0 lead. And as you start to get into that situation, all of a sudden now we can play differently offensively, where we can go for one more run, a bunt here, bunt there. And then as you spread that to 4-0, 5-0, I mean, that puts a lot of pressure on the other team in a conference tournament, especially when your season's on the line. And, we can recover from, a mistake in an inning. But when you put, three mistakes in one inning and basically give them the game right back, all the momentum goes on their side. It's just very tough to recover from that.
And it was really hard in that game specifically because it almost took another inning. I don't want to say it would take 2 innings away from Aiden Fuller, but because of those errors, it adds extra pitches. Where another inning for Aiden, that's a big deal because, man, you talk about a guy pitching on fumes. It didn't look like he was pitching on fumes that final day. I mean, he was executing really well for you.
Yeah, I thought he was throwing great. Honestly, I do think he could have got into the fifth inning if it wasn't for that. I mean, we were going to try to get him around the 60-pitch mark. And he probably could have got into the fifth, if we would have played clean baseball, and that would have been, definitely a big help there in order to do that. But yeah, I thought for coming back on three days rest, I mean, he gave us as good of an outing as we could have asked him to.
And not just Aiden, but Easton Dermody and Anthony Prawn. Those two guys were huge in both of your Indiana State games. But look, would you love to have a better result than what you did? No question about it. But again, those guys pitching on short fumes. As a coach, when you're in that dugout and those are your best options and you're trying to ride those guys in those games, how did you feel those guys executed under those circumstances to give your team the best chance at trying to advance in the tournament?
I thought they were gutty for sure. Prawn, he'd never been asked to throw more than probably 9 outs on the entire year, and for him to go out and do what he did on the first night, and then 3 days later bounce back and throw again. Him and Durham were, a little bit easier in my mind to kind of tax like that because their careers are done. They're seniors. Aiden's was the one that kind of, as a coach, you want it bad because you're wanting to win. You're wanting to win for your team. But at the same time, in the back of your mind, you're thinking, man, this guy, in a month from now, he's going to get drafted. He's got a pro career ahead of him. And you're trying to balance that fine line of doing what you think is best for your team and your desire to win, but then also not doing something stupid that's going to hurt his career. Because the last thing we want to do is run him out there on a crazy pitch count and then injure him and then set him back for his professional career. So that's a tough balance, to kind of balance there as you're making decisions.
As you kind of look at your roster right now, Coach Rhodes, and one of the biggest areas is, of course, roster management in today's day and age. It's always been an important thing, though, when you look through the years. As you sit now, which, again, we're just talking after you had all your exit meetings here at the end of the year, there's probably still some time, a little bit to digest. But what are the most important things right now that you look at your team and you go, these are areas where we have to get better. These are the areas that me, my staff, that we're going to focus on here over the course of the summer to try to retool and make Saluki baseball be a better version of itself when you get back together in the fall and then ultimately next spring.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you look at where we struggled this year offensively is we've got to get some more physical, bigger bodies in our lineup again. We've got to be able to hit a home run. I mean, you look at Indiana State, Murray, Illinois State, all those teams, they could catch back up into a game or they could spread the lead out with one swing of the bat. And a lot of times it took us, a big inning with walks, a hit, a double, another hit. Like we had to put so much together in an inning in order to score 2 or 3 runs when another team could just take a walk, boom, one swing, 2-run home run. So, our main objective offensively is to find more power throughout our lineup. And then we got to continue to get better on the mound, continue to try to get that depth. But even with the depth, I think the one thing that we have to have is you look at like Indiana State, you've got to have some frontline elite starting pitching that because our depth is at our level is going to be very similar. you're going to have that 8 to 10 man pitching rotation, but the teams that seem to always be at the top of the league, they have these 2 or 3 starting pitchers that emerge and eat up 70, 80, 90 innings, good innings.
Yeah.
And that's where we got to get to. I mean, we have to be able to have some frontline rotation pitching in order to kind of align our pitching staff in the roles that they can be very successful with.
Coach, before we fully focus on what's to come for your program, 2 guys I really failed to mention and need to mention because of the tournaments they have. I mean, Stephen Loden, obviously the huge home run that he had, that was big against Indiana State, but really the one I really wanted to focus on was Mathieu Valet, able to get to the all-tournament team, so deserving for him. How important was he for your group this past week? It felt like any time that he was at the plate, he reached base. I mean, it was very few times. I think maybe only about 4 or 5 times in the whole tournament he didn't reach base. I mean, he, again, senior, his last weekend, his last chance to play for you, that was a guy that left absolutely everything out there for you on the field.
Yeah, super happy for him just because he's an extremely hard worker, and I truly think he loved his time here at SIU. Like, he loved being a Saluki. He was a kid that we had actually recruited out of junior college. He chose to go to Dallas Baptist over our place. And then, we were lucky enough to get him after a year at DBU. And, from day one, since he was in our program, the way that he plays in the game, running hard, playing, with his hair on fire, that's the way that he's practiced since day one. So it's nice to see somebody like that just have a reward of a season that he had, and then to go out like he did in the conference tournament. It was just satisfying to see him, perform there. His family's from Canada, so they don't get to see him play very often, but they were at the conference tournament. So to be able to have his family there, to see him go out like that, it's just really cool.
To kind of further your point of what you were talking about pitching and pitching depth, it was just kind of interesting looking at the numbers and seeing where baseball is going. In college baseball in 2019, Coach Rhodes, I won't be close to the number. I can't remember the exact number, but it was about 48 teams in the country had a sub-4 ERA. This past year, it was under 10. I think it's only 8 teams in the country have a sub-4 ERA. Tells you how offensive numbers getting better. I think there's a lot of reasons for it, whether it's so much videos available, technology available, which is helping batters, of course, know what they're going to expect in terms of pitches and where they expect them in certain counts. Where do you see and what do you credit to those numbers? And where, as you said, you want to get quality innings. You want to get guys who can eat 80, 90% of those quality innings. But how much harder it is now maybe to do that in college baseball because of how much of an offensive game it really has become.
It has. Probably the last 4 years, it's starting to trend toward more of an offensive game. Number one, we're playing with a different baseball than we played with 5-6 years ago. We've gone to more of a minor league ball, which the ball it's more hard, it's harder, and it travels further. It comes off the bat hotter, and this isn't just something that we're making. I mean, this is a fact. So the baseball has made a tremendous difference on the offensive game as far as being able to hit the extra base hits, be able to hit the home runs, and then I mean, you look at the ERAs, it's almost having an ERA below 5 is what you want, because prior, you were like, hey, we need an ERA in the 4s. It's tough now, especially with the way the landscape is as far as the schools being able to, at the Power 5 level, give NIL money. Not only are they working scholarship guys, but they're also having guys walk on but get NIL money. So there's so many ways that they're attracting the best players to those places that, at our level, we're just getting the next tier down. And not that those players are bad players, but there's a lot of elite level arms that just aren't coming to the level that we're at right now. And you look at hitters, there's a lot more hitters out there than there are pitchers. And I think you can see, I mean, you look at the lineups, especially with, the day and age now where everybody is extremely old. I mean, it looks like everybody is grown men standing in the box, and I just think you got a combination of some really big physical old hitters who have had a ton of college at bats under their belt, with a juiced ball. And, the bats are continuing to get better and better and better as well, against, just probably, I wouldn't say a lack of pitching, but there's just not enough pitchers to go around college baseball.
Yeah.
And I think that's, kind of just a culmination of why the offensive numbers are so good.
For fans that maybe don't get a chance to really have a conversation with you or interact with you when it comes to how you go about looking for your next pitcher, looking for your next hitter as you talk about that into your lineup. I know those are two separate things, Coach Rhodes, but just maybe in about as I say basic terms to describe, even though there's probably not basic terms, what do you find is the best evaluating tool? And what, when you get to this time of year and now you start looking across the country for who you want to be a part of your program, what do you find is this is what's most important to me? This is what I'm going to look at, and this is how I'm going to decide whether these are guys we should go after or maybe guys we should pass on.
Yeah, I think from the pitching side of it, I mean, especially with the landscape of transfers right now, I mean, that's where, I mean, on June 3rd, the transfer portal opens up, and I mean, we'll be hitting the ground running, just like everybody in that. And, along with those transfers, I think the biggest key on the pitching side of it is we got to have people at those strikes, can compete in the strike zone, and, maybe we can develop a pitch or develop a little more velocity, but as a transfer coming in, I mean, we need somebody that's already proven that they're going to throw the ball over the plate. They're not scared to throw it over the plate. And then from the offensive standpoint, we just, as we're trying to bring in those transfers, we just want some proven success. And I think that's what everybody's striving to get is proven success. And then, like I said, some physical nature to their body. We look at Evansville, like I mentioned, Evansville, Illinois State, Murray, Indiana State, all those kids, man. I mean, just grown men throughout the field, and that's what we want. Whenever we have an opponent look across the field and they see they're playing SIU, and I'm like, man, those guys are just super physical and almost like kind of an intimidating presence when they stand in the box.
Coach, it's hard to find them, and it's really hard in today's day and age and climate to keep guys for 4 years. But as you mentioned, Evansville, Indiana State, you look at Evansville's lineup, Chase Hugg, Schallenberger, Sherry, guys who have been together for years, program guys. Even Indiana State, you could talk about the McGills, a Mike Sears, who ultimately did transfer in, even a Joe Quito, who's really played big roles for them, program guys. I know in today's climate, it's really hard when you get freshmen and freshmen that are really good, or even freshmen you got to develop to keep them on your roster. You have a roster space. That's important. How much of an emphasis do you put on we need some program guys? We need guys in here who, yes, you're going to get the transfers. You're going to mix and match, but to try your best, it's not easy. I mean, everybody likes to think, oh, just go find them. It's really hard to do. But how important do you say that's an area where we need to get our roster to a point where there's some program guys on our roster?
No, I mean, that would be huge. And it'll be interesting to see over the next several years. I think that's where, where I feel disappointed. We won 33 games, and I feel this huge disappointment. And, I don't say this to make ourselves feel any better, but you look across college baseball, and 5-6 years ago, if you won 33 games, you didn't really feel good about it. You go across college baseball right now, I mean, the win totals are in that 32, 33, 34 range across college baseball. And I really do think the transfers in, out, new team, have a lot to do with that. And, you look at all the regional teams this year, I mean, right there, we're all right there in the same mix of wins. There's not many teams right now that are in that 38, 39, 40-plus win total. And that's not something that was common 5 or 6 years ago. I mean, it was very common for a lot of teams in college baseball at the upper level to be in that almost 40-win total range. And I think there's something to be said about just the newness of every single team, because even though you have them for a full year, nothing really starts to gel until once you get into the season and roles start to etch out and there's equal playing time in the fall. It doesn't, that doesn't happen in the spring, and so you're managing a lot of different, players there who typically have always played at other places or they wouldn't have transferred in here. And, so you're trying to manage, your roster, you're trying to win games, you're trying to keep people happy, all those different things. And I just think, obviously having those glue guys, those guys that had been around, that would be a huge piece of the puzzle. But it's definitely difficult at this day and age because, people are transferring for a million different reasons, whether, they didn't play, they want to transfer. They played extremely well. They want to transfer. It's very tough right now.
Well, the other side that's really tough in your job, and I think in any of our sports, at any you look around here on campus, scheduling is the hardest thing to do. And there's no perfect science. It's hard to get people to want to come here and play you. It's even hard at times to even try to find some bye games every now and then. I know this past year the non-conference strength of schedule was really fluctuating. At one point it was around 295. I think it's set around that mark. I know that's a mark before the year you go, that's where you want to be. As you look towards next year, as you look towards building your schedule, what are things there, Coach Rhodes, that you try to look at? And because you don't know your roster yet, that's part of the decision-making process too, of ways where the league has shown that if you schedule harder, you can be in position to get an at-large. Where do you see that from the standpoint of your program where you'd like to see that grow?
Yeah, I think that's another thing in college baseball that has slowed down a lot because everybody is in this situation. We're sitting here right now where you're kind of thinking, man, what is our roster going to be like?
Yeah.
Are we, you feel kind of like you're in a decent spot, but you don't feel like, hey, we're going to be really good or we're not going to be good. So prior to probably 2 years ago, everybody had their schedule 2-3 years in advance. And now, we're sitting here right now, and just like a lot of college baseball teams, we have open schedules or open weekends in our schedule because we're trying to evaluate and see, what do we need to do? Do we like our team a lot and we need to schedule hard? Do we not know if our team's going to be, good or where are we going to fall into? Because the last thing you want to do is underschedule, and the last thing you want to do is overschedule. So I think it's, a lot of people have slowed down the scheduling of your next season just because of all the transfers, who's going out, who's coming in. And, so we probably won't finalize our actual schedule until, August, September, somewhere around there, which is a totally different trend than what it was several years ago when, you would already, I'd be working on 2027 schedule at this point, if it was, 5-6 years ago. So, and that's probably not necessarily a bad thing either, because sometimes when you schedule so far in advance, you're scheduling on what you think a team is, and sometimes they end up being better than what you hoped they were, and sometimes they end up being a lot worse than you hoped they were. So it's probably better that is slowed down to where you have more of an idea on who you're actually going to play on that given season.
You mentioned the transfer window that's ultimately going to come, and we'll see how many guys end up coming in, how many guys end up going. That's always this part of the year. I know you probably expect Aiden Fuller to get drafted. Don't expect him to be back, so Al Holguin will be that one starter that you expect to return. Of course, there's a plethora of guys that have played for you from a defensive standpoint and offensive standpoint. As you sit here today, Coach Rhodes, I know I asked a similar question to start, but how much do you kind of expect to lose? How much do you expect to have to replace? But also, as you said, you want to get better. So plain and simple, that's the ultimate goal, I'm sure, whether that is replacing, retooling, whatever the term is, you just want to get better.
Yeah, I think it'll probably be about a 50-50 mix of some guys coming back and, some new players coming in. So we'll, it'll just like every team in the country, man. The best players that we can get, we're going to go after them. And obviously we have to have, some specific positions that we do have to fill. But we're going to go after the best players possible, guys who are athletic, guys who can swing the bat. And, we'll move them around the field if we need to. If we get 9 really good hitters, we'll figure out a way to get them into the lineup and defensive positions. And then, just the best pitchers we can find. Obviously, we're going to be, hitting the portal. Those are the hardest ones
Yeah.
because everybody in the country is looking for arms. So those are tough to find.
It's one of those things too, Coach Rhodes, during my time being around all the different teams I have, when you miss guys for a year, and there's guys where we've had conversations about this year. Two guys specifically I think about are Nelly and Shark, of course. And Shark, proof is in the pudding. I mean, Shark has shown it for you here how good he has been. But when they come back, they always have that moment you're like, yeah, that's what we missed a year ago. That's why they were so important. Those two guys specifically, and then others, I know it really rearrange your infield. Defensively, you were maybe playing guys out of position. I'm not trying to set a tone or ask a question of terms of excuses because there are none, but how eager are you to get those two guys specifically back, but also how they can help put other guys that maybe were playing out of position this year to maybe where there was frustration to put them more in a position where they can thrive, and it just makes everybody at a better level.
Yeah, I think, one, I think from the team standpoint, whenever, our players are looking around and they see, Shark and that he's going to hit in the 4-hole and that he's one of our main players and he's a great first baseman, and then when he gets knocked out, it's, not only are we as coaches thinking, man, that's a tough loss, our players are thinking the same thing. Not that players, aren't stepping in, playing those positions, giving a great effort, but it's just it's different. Even the players are disappointed. So to get key guys back, to get key leadership back, to get guys who are just mature, it's definitely going to be a big piece to that for sure. And the other thing too is hopefully we hit on just a lot of really good kids. I mean that was the great thing about this past season is we had a lot of great kids who worked hard, but man, they were just great to be around every single day. Easy to coach, and no issues off the field, things like that. So that's another big piece of it too. I mean, we're not just trying to go out there and find a bunch of players that can play good. I mean, we want players in here that are going to represent our program well and be a joy to be around every single day.
I think it's a really good point to end on here for our last question, Coach Rhodes, and kind of previewing next year is what you said is this group this year, no question, maybe expectations weren't reached. Maybe at times you weren't playing to the level you wanted to play, but you really enjoyed being around them. You really enjoyed being on the road with them and seeing who they were as individuals. But from an on-field standpoint, just as we close, what I liked about the past week was your team did not play like they were ready for their year to be over with. And there's so many teams that don't reach expectation when it comes conference tournament time, especially kind of the path you had to go, playing an extra game and then playing the number 1 seed. Many teams would, all right, we're just gonna mail it in. They did not do that this past week. That's a good makeup. But what makeup of your team do you want to see improve next year, just kind of as we close?
I think probably just the word consistency. I think if you look at the conference tournament, I think it was kind of pretty much a picture of our season. I mean, you on any given day, we were one of the best teams in our conference. And then on any given day, we weren't very competitive. And then I think, you kind of look, even though we had that day against Illinois State where we were in the hotel forever and didn't play till 10 p.m. that night, the first 2 games of that conference tournament, we played so well, and it put us in a position to really capitalize on that tournament. And then we just show up against Illinois State, and we just did not play. I mean, it wouldn't have mattered who we played that night. We weren't going to win. And that kind of where I talked with some of our guys in our meetings before we left. With us playing here and playing here, that's why we were so in between. If we could have just lived in the middle ground more, then we probably get to 37, 38, 39 wins by just being more consistent. And I think that's where, us as coaches, we've got to look ourselves in the mirror and understand that we play a significant role in getting that consistency out of our guys. And that was probably where I'm most disappointed in myself this year is that I couldn't put my finger on it as of now. It's something I'm going to have to reflect and think about over the summer. But, why could we get them to be one of the best teams in our league on a day? And then why would we want to be one of the, on some days where we one of the worst teams in our conference? because the talent level was too high, and we had too much talent in order to be that team just riding a huge wave. So we've got to figure out, one, we got to get our roster where it's super talented, and two, we've got to be consistent with our effort on a day-to-day basis.
Coach Rhodes, not just appreciate your time today, but all throughout the year, whether it was really good weekend results or some tough weekend results that we had to talk about, you always sat in that chair and you always answered every question. You never dodged it, just like you did today for almost 30 minutes. I know not only do I appreciate it, I know our fans really appreciate the insight to the program each and every week. We'll have to do this in the fall as a catch-up when you finally get the roster going. And then can't wait to be doing this again next year. I know it seems very far out in the distance, but you and I both know it will be back blink of an eye. Just know it's much appreciated from my end and really appreciated spending year one here with you.
Well, it's been great. I appreciate everything that you do for the program. I know just as much as fan interaction as we can get, obviously, it just enhances our profile, and that's what we want to do. We want to, even though it seems like we're taking small little steps, I mean, I want to look back in this thing in 5, 6, 7, 8 years and realize the heartaches that we had. I mean, it was worth it because, Indiana State just didn't overnight get to where they're at. I mean, they had some roughness there before they got this thing going, and I don't want to just idolize them, so to speak, but I think they're, with them being in our conference, a very similar town, university, facilities, I think they're a good team to kind of look at their path and see, okay, we can get there. And I'm frustrated because I expected to kind of be there closer than what we've done so far. But at the same time, I also feel, and I was talking to one of my coaching buddies yesterday about this too, and his team finished in second place in their league and had 32 wins, and he kind of said, well, I guess if we're feeling super disappointed and we won 32, 33 wins, then I feel like we're going in the right direction. So again, disappointed, not satisfied for sure, but we've got some positive things to build on, and I feel like our future's bright, and I'm excited to kind of start it all over again in August.